China sanctioning 11 Americans, including Senators Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio, this after similar measures by Washington against officials from Hong Kong and mainland China. We're joined by John Hanna to talk about this. John, the former National Security Advisor to then Vice President Dick Cheney, and he's the Foundation for Defense of Democracy Senior Counselor. It's good to see you, John. Your reaction, Rubio and Cruz, I guess, the biggest names on this list, but there are a number of other American officials. Your reaction to the latest move from China?
Yeah, well, listen, Connell, I think the Chinese are kind of scrambling. They've been put on their back foot by this absolute onslaught, this economic, diplomatic, ideological offensive by the Trump administration to punish them across the board for their malign activities. And China is kind of reaching out, trying to figure out how it can sort of save face and hit back at the U.S. But let's face it, sanctions by China don't nearly meet the kind of pain that is inflicted on Chinese officials by American sanctions. When you're locked out of the world's major reserve currency, the dollar, it's a lot different than being locked out of the Chinese financial system. It's apples and oranges.
What are your thoughts on the, strategically on the Trump administration's stepped up efforts? Because you're right, people talk about President Trump as having been, quote, tough on China, but this is something different we've seen in the last, number of weeks. As an example, the president had actually been criticized by some China hawks early in his administration for not being outspoken enough on human rights, the Uyghur Muslims, for example, but that has started to change. What do you make strategically of the shift it seems we're seeing from the Trump administration here?
Well, on the one hand, I think it was absolutely essential. I mean, as the president has said, far too many administrations in the past have had absolutely the wrong paradigm about China, treating it as if it could be brought into an American-led international order as a responsible stakeholder. That has been absolutely disproven by China's own malign behavior, aggressive activities in the South China Sea, human rights crackdown against Muslims in Hong Kong, threatening of Taiwan, the whole coronavirus crisis and disaster. So I think the president's shift on China was absolutely essential. I think it will carry over for decades to come in American foreign policy, this absolute necessity of really competing with China to see whose vision of an international order, of an international system is going to carry the day here. I do think we've got to be careful because these are two great nuclear powers as well. And right now, their relationships are on a very steep downward slope. And there's not clear what the bottom of that will be. And I just think it's also a time for good diplomacy as well to manage this competition as carefully as possible.
Two great nuclear powers. Of course, we've been through that before with the Soviet Union in the Cold War. But what's, I guess, different here is you're talking about two great economic powers that do a lot of trade with each other. Are we going down a road where, it will be similar to those old Cold War days, but with much more on the line economically, going just two completely separate directions for big American companies, big Chinese companies? What do you think?
Well, I certainly think that's the trend line that we're on right now, is a major decoupling of the world's two biggest economies, which, as you say, Connell, is unprecedented in history. I don't think we have anything to look back on in history that is in any way similar, where the stakes are higher. Not only two great military powers, but the two largest economies in the world that are deeply, deeply enmeshed. And the cost to the American people, to the Chinese people, to the international economy of a major confrontation and division into two absolutely separate systems is something that I'm not sure we've at all built in and calculated what the price of that could be. I think everybody's hoping for some kind of middle ground where we clearly have a new paradigm of competing against China and yet are able to maintain some levels of transactional cooperation in areas where it's necessary for us to be able to work together.
Seems tougher and tougher to do as the days go on. John, it's always good to see you.